At the company's celebratory banquet, Elena got completely wasted. Somehow, she ended up pushing open the wrong door, stumbling straight into the private room of the partner company's CEO. As fate would have it, the man sitting there was none other than Julian Vance, her husband by contract. Liquid courage making her as bold as a lion, Elena grabbed the lapels of his suit jacket and loudly commanded him, telling Julian to hurry up and throw his money around to buy out this stingy company for her, because she wanted to become the boss. Hey everyone, today I'm sharing the story of Elena, a talented woman who got her hard work stolen, bravely stood up for herself, and completely turned her life around with a powerful husband by her side. It's sweet, inspiring, and full of meaning. Let's dive in. The fact of the matter was that Elena had just pulled her company back from the brink of bankruptcy with a mega project. By her rough calculations, with a contract worth over $40 million and a 15% commission, her bank account was about to explode with a massive bonus. But the most enticing bait was the prize the company had just dangled. If she could outperform the current manager within 3 months, she would be promoted to a position with a sky-high salary. Just thinking about the prospect of swimming in a sea of cash was enough to drive her crazy with joy. Because of this earth-shattering achievement, Mr. Thomas, their boss, who was notoriously stingy enough to squeeze blood from a stone, actually splurged for the first time in history to treat the entire department to a proper dinner. However, reality fell short of her dreams. Right after clocking out, Mr. Thomas called Elena into his private office. He told her that the company had escaped death this time, and the credit belonged entirely to her, adding that without her, the company would have gone under a long time ago. Elena waved her hand, smiling like a blooming flower, and told Mr. Thomas that he was being too polite, as it was just her duty. She suggested he simply give her the raise and promotion, and they could discuss the other matters later. Elena was a pragmatist. She worked out of passion, but her passion was money. When Mr. Thomas looked flustered and began scratching his head, Elena's sharp intuition instantly started ringing alarm bells, signaling that something was wrong. Mr. Thomas then said he had a matter he wanted to discuss with her. Elena wondered if the old man was planning to block her path to riches. Mr. Thomas continued, saying he was very proud of her for closing such a massive deal, and the board of directors had also praised her highly. Hating beat-around-the-bush nonsense, Elena cut Mr. Thomas off directly, telling him to just speak plainly because she was too lazy to listen to corporate scripts. The boss sighed and revealed that Victoria was the cherished daughter of Director Harrison. He explained that with Victoria's achievements this term, the sales director seat was already predetermined for her. He added that, since Victoria represented the major shareholders, they had to know when to take a step back, even though he and the executives fully recognized Elena's capability and evident hard work. Hearing this, Elena saw right through the situation. The boss wanted her to voluntarily withdraw from the race because he was afraid of offending the corporate royalty. It was laughable to think someone could use their family connections to crush another person's hard work. Rage flared up fiercely inside Elena. The company had established a fair competition policy. Yet now, they were breaking their word and feeding employees empty promises. For this mega project, Elena had worn out her heels running everywhere for 3 straight months, working so hard that her hair was falling out. Mr. Thomas then offered to draw from a private fund to give Elena an additional personal bonus, asking how she felt about that while offering a placating smile. Elena thought to herself, asking if the boss really believed this was a matter money could solve. She refused to compromise with that corrupt capitalist. As long as the voice recorder in her pocket was turned on, and she threw this conversation to the labor court, Mr. Thomas would have to pay a hefty price. True gold does not fear fire. If Victoria were truly capable, Elena would gladly yield the seat out of genuine respect. But trying to force her to step aside was a daydream. She believed the wealthy heiress should go train her professional skills instead. Knocking her hand against the desk, Elena enunciated each word, telling Mr. Thomas that she would absolutely not back down. She reminded him that the partner had already deposited $40 million for the contract. The black and white paperwork was still in her hands, and she held the original copy. She stated that unless the boss's brain was completely fried, no one else was allowed to sit in that sales director chair except for her. And the harsh reality proved that Mr. Thomas's brain was indeed fried, right at the celebration party held at the resort. He beat his chest and confidently announced to the entire staff that Victoria had just brilliantly closed a 10-year, pre-ordered mega contract with the Vance Corporation, officially promoting her to sales director. Under the table, Elena clenched both hands so tightly her knuckles turned white, a lump of resentment choking her throat. Impossible to swallow and impossible to spit out. Victoria was dolled up in a bright red haute couture evening gown, her makeup so glamorous she looked as though she were attending the Academy Awards. She put on a delicate, soft-spoken act, raising her champagne glass to thank the boss and her dear colleagues for loving and yielding to her. Elena could not take it anymore. She slammed her hand on the table with a loud thud, stood straight up, and pointed right at Mr. Thomas's face, asking if this was how he cleared the path for a shareholder's daughter. Victoria's face grew stiff, and she hurriedly barked at Elena, telling her not to slander people by throwing wild accusations. Elena shot back, asking what she was startled about, noting that she must have hit the bullseye, and adding that if Victoria hadn't used the back door, she must have crawled through the window, whereas Elena herself was completely open and transparent, with nothing to fear from anyone. She added that it was laughable because with the current global economic fluctuations, Vance was a corporate giant in this city, and while they were indeed swimming in capital, signing a 10-year order in this day and age was pure fantasy. Elena stated that Vance's risk management department was famously strict and full of seasoned wolves, so there was no way they could make such a brainless decision, concluding that one could use their knees to think and know this was a fake order with falsified documentation. Victoria glared with wide eyes and shrieked back, asking if Elena dared to question the authenticity of her project. Her cronies, led by Nana, immediately chimed in to tear Elena apart, asking if she was just green with envy and letting her eyes get red because someone else had snatched the prize, adding that a bitter loser trying to tear things down like her was the one who was actually suspicious. Pushed to this point, Victoria trembling at her phone and opened a glowing image of a wire transfer receipt, holding it up in front of everyone as proof. At a passing glance, it looked legitimate enough. Unfortunately for her, a pro photo editor like Elena only needed half an eye to spot the blind spot. The tiny transaction date in the bottom right corner of the screen still clearly showed a timestamp from the previous month. Elena remarked that the Photoshop skills were pitifully amateur, advising her to hire a better technician the next time she photoshopped an image. Elena's words felt like an invisible slap. Victoria's face turned from bright red to a bruised purple, while Mr. Thomas stood still as a stone statue, completely tongue-tied. The cover-up was glaringly obvious. Elena ripped off the name tag pinned to her chest and threw it straight onto the table with a sharp clatter. She told Mr. Thomas that his decision today was not only pathetic but also utterly nauseating, declaring that she was done and was resigning right then and there. She turned to look at the junior members of her team and spoke in a clear, loud voice, reminding them that true gold does not fear fire, while cheap gold-plated trash would inevitably peel sooner or later. She told them to stay and try their best to maintain their professional ethics, adding that they should use their own competence to take what belonged to them, and warned that those who steal should be careful not to choke on it. She concluded that since their paths were parting from now on, she was draining this glass, wishing them a final goodbye with no plans to meet again. After speaking, Elena downed her shot of strong liquor. A burning sensation raced down her throat straight to her stomach, and her mind began to spin. She stumbled into the restroom and threw up violently. Mia, the intern Elena had trained with her own hands, stood beside her holding tissues with tears welling up in her eyes. Mia cried out, asking why Elena had been so impulsive, suggesting that even if they lost this round, they could have planned for the next, and wondered where Elena would find a job in such a difficult economy after quitting so abruptly. Mia was a bright, well-behaved girl, and Elena doted on her very much. Elena wiped her mouth and let out a bitter smile, telling Mia that she was still too naive. She explained that the more she yielded, the more they would treat her like a soft piece of dough to be pushed around. Elena added that she hadn't lashed out because she was angry, but because she was a lion, and lions do not share a table with hyenas. She then told Mia to go back out to the party first and leave her alone for a moment. As Mia walked out of sight, taking the last bit of Elena's hazy consciousness with her, Elena finally raised her foot and kicked the restroom stall door open, shouting that the bald old bastard Thomas could listen up, because she didn't give a damn about him anymore. He coddled someone else's daughter but didn't dare let her enter the ring to compete fairly with Elena because he was afraid she would lose miserably. She pointed at the invisible wall, cursing aggressively, asking if they were bullying her because she had no umbrella to shelter her and no background. She questioned if they were really kissing up to a piece of gold-plated trash while tossing away a brilliant diamond like her. calling him a muddled old man whose company would sooner or later go bankrupt under his management. Then she wailed, crying that they had all ganged up to bully her and declaring that she would go home to tell her husband, making him beat every single one of them to a pulp. She staggered out into the resort corridor, her left foot tripping over her right as the world spun around. Just as she was about to faceplant and bite the floor, she fell with a thud against a firm, warm chest. A familiar scent of cedarwood mixed with cool mint hit her nose, exactly like the scent on Julian Vance. She blinked her blurry, tear-stained eyes and giggled, thanking the handsome guy and noting that he looked exactly like her makeshift husband. A deep, warm voice, as gentle as a spring breeze, drifted past her ear, asking if someone had bullied her. The moment she clearly saw Julian's sharply sculpted face, all her suppressed grievances boiled over, and she pounced into his arms like a koala. Crying out loud, she told Julian that she was so useless and had been bullied by others, demanding that he hurry up and kiss her to comfort her. Her worst habit when drunk was her tendency to act reckless. Wiping her tears, she pouted, stood on her tiptoes, and forcefully planted a loud kiss right on his lips. Then, using the supernatural strength of a drunkard, she dragged him along back to his hotel room. She kicked the door open with a slam, her eyes half closed, and her reckless streak flared up once again. Wrapping her arms tightly around his waist, she shouted into thin air, ordering Julian to hurry up and throw his money around to buy out that stingy, bald old man's company for her, because she wanted to be the queen of that place. When the morning sun shone into the room, Elena vaguely woke up and found herself nestled squarely in Julian's arms. Holding her breath, she lay completely still like a drowsy chicken, not daring to move a muscle. Her hands were tightly clasped over her stomach, but unfortunately, her bladder was staging a fierce protest. She desperately needed to use the restroom. She stealthily shifted her body centimeter by centimeter, intending to make a quick escape. Right then, a deep, raspy, sleep-deprived male voice echoed above her head, asking if she was already planning to run away after doing something bad, which made her jump in fright. She wondered how on earth she had crawled onto Julian's bed. Swearing to heaven and earth, she knew it must have been an accident, so she stammered that she wasn't trying to hide and just wanted to go relieve herself. Assuming Julian must be completely speechless with her, she bolted as fast as her legs could carry her, running into the bathroom, locking the door, and frantically checking her body. Relief washed over her. Her clothes were still intact, meaning nothing that crossed moral boundaries had happened between her and Julian. To put it bluntly, they were contract spouses. She had signed the papers to marry him to dodge her parents' fatal marriage proddings, while he needed a shield to shut up his clan. The world was small, and they had bumped into each other through a blind date. How could she have ever imagined that the man sitting across from her, who controlled hundreds of billions in assets, would actually be miserably going on blind dates? At the time, she had made up a story about being a regular employee earning a meager salary, and he had humbly claimed to run a small company just to get by. He had mentioned that he used to live a nomadic life with the 4 Seas as his home, but now that his parents were forcing him to marry, he wanted to find a place to settle down. But once he brought her home to his mansion, she finally realized the truth. Julian's 4 Seas as his home meant that within the span of those 4 Seas, he owned real estate absolutely everywhere. Sure enough, the world of capitalists was entirely beyond her reach. After the wedding, she had flatly refused to stay home and act as a trophy wife, insisting on sticking with her corporate job. He had gone along with her wishes, likely knowing she was the type of person addicted to making money, so he just let her be. By the time she walked out of the bathroom, Julian had already finished changing his clothes. A finely tailored black suit wrapped perfectly around his flawless physique, exuding an elite, noble aura that was intensely overwhelming. Elena truly could not understand how some people in this world could throw on a piece of rag and still manage to look like a domineering CEO, though she forgot that his very nature was already that of a chief executive. Julian suddenly called out, telling Elena to come over. Goodness, she instantly got goosebumps all over. Since their wedding, he had never called her in such a sweet, coaxing tone. He was standing there, holding 2 silk ties, one dark navy blue and one metallic silver gray, and asked her which one complemented his skin tone better. Stunned, Elena blindly pointed at the navy blue one, suggesting that this color suited the Forbidden Desire CEO style. Laughing, he immediately thrust the navy blue tie into her hands and lowered his voice, asking her to help him tie it with a deadly, pleading undertone. Elena's face burned hot, and she replied that she wasn't very good at this. Before today, they had always lived their own separate lives, minding their own business and even sleeping in separate rooms. Last night was completely an unintended accident. Why on earth did she suddenly find this man, Julian Vance? Kind of adorable. He was supposed to be the forbidden desire type after all. But a tricky problem arose. Elena was 5'4", a standard height for an Asian woman, whereas Julian stood at a towering 6'2". Even straining on her tiptoes, she could not reach his collar. While she was squirming around looking for a stool or something to stand on, Julian proactively bent his body slightly, lowering his head close to her face. Thump, thump. Her heart skipped a beat. She stammered, asking him if he could not lean in so close, because this distance was too ambiguous, making it feel as though he was about to kiss her. Telling herself to clear her mind and restrain these lustful thoughts, she quickly tied a twisted Windsor knot and immediately averted her gaze. Heaven was truly flagrantly biased at times. Julian possessed peak good looks, power, and even a six-pack, while she wasn't too bad herself, having both the ambition to make money and the ability to enjoy life. Saying she had married above her station was a bit much. They were clearly a perfect match, one daring to marry and the other daring to follow. Seeing her cheeks as red as tomatoes, the corners of Julian's lips curled into a sunny smile. He reached out and stroked the top of her head like he was petting a puppy, asking if she was shy. How could she not be shy? The atmosphere between the two of them had suddenly degenerated, shifting from housemates straight into an idol drama. Elena ducked her head, pretending to be deaf. Julian then informed her that his mother had called them to come over to the main mansion for dinner tonight. Elena panicked internally, wondering which mother he meant, realizing it was his, and thinking that she was completely doomed. It would undoubtedly be the same old script of rushing them to have babies. She stood frozen, as if her brain had been surgically removed for a full minute, her mind spinning wildly to find a counter-strategy. She was still in the prime of her youth and did not want to wear a yoke and become a nursing mother just yet. On the other hand, if she did have a child with Julian given his premium genes, the baby would definitely be breathtakingly beautiful. Julian glanced at his Patek Philippe watch, teasingly calling her a silly girl and warning her that she would be late for clocking in if she didn't hurry up and get ready. Agreeing flusteredly, Elena frantically grabbed her handbag and dashed out the door before she could even brush her hair properly. It wasn't until she was safely seated inside Julian's Maybach that her brain finally registered the fact she had already loudly resigned the night before. Furthermore, why were they sharing a car today? Normally, it was every man for himself, with each taking their own path. Elena called out to Julian, asking him to drop her off at the upcoming intersection. Still calmly holding the steering wheel, he noted that they hadn't reached her company yet. Blushing furiously, she knew she absolutely could not let him know that she had just become gloriously unemployed. She stammered out an excuse, saying she wanted to turn off to buy a cup of coffee, and that he didn't need to drive her all the way to the lobby. Julian was very understanding and did not press her further, smoothly pulling the car over to the curb and telling her to be careful on the road. Elena bought a random macchiato, thinking to herself that even if she was quitting, she still had to hold her head high, go to the office, and hand over the books properly. She then hailed a taxi to head over to the company building. As soon as Elena stepped out of the cab, two luxury vehicles parked prominently in front of the lobby caught her eye. One was a sleek, gleaming Rolls-Royce, and the other, wait, why did it look so familiar? It was Julian's Maybach. When she reached her department, the atmosphere was thick with an unusual tension. The moment her colleagues saw her walk in, they instantly went dead silent, their faces completely pale. Mia crept over fearfully and tugged at Elena's arm, asking if she had finished sleeping off the alcohol. Elena asked what was going on and why the place felt like a funeral. Trembling, Mia pointed toward the glass conference room, whispering that their bald boss, Mr. Thomas, was inside with Elena's husband. Mia's words hit Elena like a bolt from the blue, bringing back every single horrifying memory from the night before. Burying her face in her hands, Elena cried out to the heavens, thinking she was utterly doomed, now that her identity as the CEO's wife had been completely exposed. Right then, Victoria swayed out from nowhere, letting out a sneer and asking if that was why Elena had been so confident about the Vanthith contract, wondering if it turned out she had a sugar daddy backing her up. Victoria told everyone to look, mocking that immediate karma had arrived and the creditor had come straight to the company to collect the debt. The Vanthith contract was the culmination of 3 months of Elena grinding day and night, pouring her blood, sweat, and tears into it, so Victoria's comment about having a sugar daddy felt like a slap in the face. Unable to swallow this insult, and knowing she held legitimate degrees and qualifications, Elena wondered what on earth she had to fear. Crossing her arms and tossing her chin up, Elena told Victoria her words were grating to the ears. She stated that she didn't use casting couch rules and was more than capable of securing Vance's deposit, unlike certain people who relied on family status to steal deals that were entirely imaginary anyway. Elena asked if Victoria didn't find it mentally exhausting to live in a fantasy world by making up a 10-year contract, addressing her as the fake sales director. Losing her mind with rage, Victoria raised her hand and was about to lunge forward to claw at Elena's face, barking at Elena not to be so arrogant. Elena scoffed, asking who was the arrogant one and calling Victoria a shameless parasite who stole others' intellectual property. She told Victoria that an incompetent, useless person like her shouldn't sit in that chair just to dirty the spot, calling her a piece of trash. Since she had already submitted her resignation anyway, Elena didn't care about offending anyone and chewed her out just to vent her anger. Victoria's hand swung through the air, but before it could touch Elena's face, it was firmly gripped by a hand as solid as steel. Julian had arrived. His gaze was as sharp as a knife, and he threw Victoria's hand away with utter disgust. He pulled a premium wet wipe from his suit pocket and leisurely wiped each of his fingers as if he had just touched bacteria, ordering them to get this eyesore out of his sight. Mr. Thomas came scuttling out behind him, bowing obsequiously at a 90-degree angle, frantically agreeing with Chief Executive Officer Vance. Victoria panicked and shrieked at Mr. Thomas, asking if he had eaten a tiger's liver to gain such nerve, reminding him that her father was a major shareholder. Julian curled his lips into a contemptuous smirk, stating that his company, Julian Vance's company, absolutely did not harbor useless people. Elena's jaw dropped in shock. His company? Did he really throw his money around to buy out this entire company? It was insane. This man was completely out of his mind. Clutching his sleeve, Elena stammered, asking Julian if there was anyone else he found to be an eyesore. The moment the words slipped out, she wished she could bite her own tongue off, wondering why she had just said something that sounded so intensely like a tyrant abusing their power. However, it was highly effective. The lackeys on Victoria's team stared at Elena with terrified expressions and backed away several meters, likely cursing themselves internally for accidentally insulting her the day before. But Elena was a woman of character and had no intention of settling scores with small fry, especially since there were still talented individuals on that team. She pointed at Victoria and Nana, ordering them to get these two out of her sight, adding that it was best to send this duo packing early to clear the air. Julian nodded, waved his hand to give the order to his assistants, and told Mr. Thomas that he had heard her, stating that whatever his wife wanted should be done accordingly. Wiping away beads of sweat, Mr. Thomas frantically nodded in agreement, assuring Chief Executive Officer Vance to rest easy because he would have HR process the paperwork immediately. Thus, thanks to this massive umbrella of protection, Elena tore up her resignation letter on the spot, thinking she would be an idiot to leave when her hundreds of thousands of dollars in commission were still right here. Victoria and Nana, who had looked so majestic and powerful just moments ago, were now miserably dragged away by the scruff of their necks by security guards. The sales director chair rightfully and legally belonged to Elena. Mr. Thomas was demoted to operations manager, while Julian, Elena's husband who had practically dropped from the sky, naturally became the chairman of the board. Early in the afternoon, Elena gathered the entire staff of the sales department for a meeting. Walking past Mr. Thomas's office, she knocked on the door and told Mr. Thomas that the sales department was having a team meeting with Chairman Vance attending, so he should grab his notebook and come join them to be counted present. Clutching his vacuum flask, Mr. Thomas obediently scurried along like he was attending a martial arts grand tournament, replying that it was no problem at all and he would be right there. The entire conference room was dead silent, with everyone holding their breath, leaving only the leather chair at the center for Elena. Julian sat in a corner, the corners of his lips curling into a slight smile as he nodded to signal for her to take control of the forum. Elena didn't even bother to act humble. This throne was a position she had exchanged her own sweat and tears for. After a speech about the spirit of solidarity, she concluded with a firm, ironclad statement, declaring that from now on, the sales department was a unified front, and if anyone dared to play dirty tricks behind her back to aid rival companies, they shouldn't blame Elena for showing no mercy. Having used both the carrot and the stick flawlessly, she generously waved her hand at the end of the session, announcing that this weekend she was treating the entire department to a grand feast. and Chairman Vance would be the one swiping his card. While the rest of the room was still looking dazed, Julian leisurely stood up and added that everything would be done according to his wife's orders. Hearing those words, "my wife," enter her ears made her feel incredibly thrilled. Yet she also felt a bit prickly, sensing that Julian was simply treating her as a source of amusement. By the time the rush hour arrived, Elena was startled to see him still lingering in the lobby, suddenly remembering that they had an appointment tonight to go to her mother-in-law's house for dinner. Her heart immediately began to thud like a frantic drum beat. She rarely interacted with her parents-in-law, and even her own biological parents rarely checked in on her. Her mindset was very progressive. As long as both sets of parents were perfectly healthy, she would focus on grinding for money first, believing that when the elders eventually fell ill, slapping a fat sack of cash on the table was the ultimate form of filial piety. But she wondered what kind of gift she should buy for the occasion. Julian told her that his family had absolutely everything, so there was no need to buy anything. How could she do that? Her reputation as a thoughtless daughter-in-law had already spread far and wide, so she had to redeem her image now. Consequently, she made a sweep through a high-end supermarket, purchasing 6 bottles of genuine Maotai liquor, 6 boxes of premium Longjing tea, 6 boxes of raw bird's nest, 2 limited edition cosmetic sets, and an enormous basket of imported fruit. Leaning against his supercar, Julian raised an eyebrow and asked her if she was going home for dinner or if she was going smuggling. Elena snapped back, asking him if he thought she and he had already become a real family to be so casual about it, stating that image was everything, and telling him to hurry up and help her carry the things. She felt a sharp pang of regret over the money spent, but reasoned that lost money could always be remitted again. As long as the elders enjoyed the food and completely forgot the recurring chorus of when they were going to have babies, this investment would yield a super profit. She clapped for herself internally, praising her own outstanding intelligence. After getting married, they had moved out to live on their own. Julian had used the excuse of wanting to avoid the typical mother and daughter-in-law friction. And his parents belonged to the modern class as well, stating that young people needed space to keep things warm. Elena knew full well he was keeping her boundaries safe. During their blind date, she had already set a ground rule that she absolutely hated living under the same roof with parents. The moment they stepped into the mega mansion, her mother-in-law enthusiastically ran out to greet them, exclaiming that Elena was finally home, adding that she was already overjoyed just by them coming over to visit. So there was no need to bring so many things and waste money. Elena thought to herself that she was indeed a wealthy lady. Living in a mansion spanning over 6,000 square feet, what could she possibly be lacking? Activating her dutiful daughter-in-law mode, Elena chirped that she had gone through a lot of trouble to track down the bird's nest from the finest brand, offering to stew it with nut milk for her tonight so she could taste her culinary skills. Elena was actually bluffing. If she were to stew bird's nest, it would probably turn into superglue soup. She begged in her mind for her mother-in-law not to agree. Her mother-in-law gently patted her hand, asking if that was so, but added that a girl's delicate, jade-like hands shouldn't be touched by smoke and fire, noting that entering the kitchen meant a lifetime of hardship. She concluded that they should just let Julian do the cooking for them. Julian was indeed perceptive and immediately laid out a red carpet for her to retreat, saying that it was fine and they should let her darling son show off his skills. She had to admit that getting this husband was worth every penny. The moment Julian vanished into the kitchen, her mother-in-law suddenly grasped Elena's hands tightly, her eyes wavering and welling up with tears. She choked out that the Vance family had made things hard for Elena and forced her to suffer a disadvantage, but told her to rest assured because she would do everything in her power to find a specialist in the West, declaring that they absolutely had to cure that illness for Julian because the Vance family could not have their lineage cut off. Elena wondered what on earth this was and what kind of family drama was unfolding. An illness? What illness? And what did she mean by cutting off their lineage? Her brain felt like it was smoking as she processed the information. On the outside, Julian looked bursting with vitality. During dinner that night, even though she was eating jadeite and shark fin, it tasted as bland as straw in her mouth, her stomach churning with nonstop anxiety. She wondered if he had a terminal illness, truly not knowing what sophisticated words to use to ask him. She wanted to know if he was infertile, but asking it bluntly would be too hurtful. Julian stiffened, his grip on the steering wheel tightening until veins popped on his hands. He furrowed his brows and gave a deep hum in response. Elena quickly told him not to be sad, explaining that she meant there was nothing to be ashamed of when having an illness. She noted that coincidentally, she was also a dink proponent, believing that a double income with no kids was absolutely great, so the two of them were surprisingly compatible. She urged him not to feel insecure, adding that medicine was very advanced nowadays, science and technology were everywhere, and she promised to accompany him on the journey to seek treatment. Julian dropped a casual remark, gently thanking her. Elena was still deeply immersed in her own melodramatic, tragic script, acting out a self-made scenario of a couple bound by lifelong devotion. She told him there was no need to thank her, stating that they had already sworn vows when they married, so even if he couldn't have children, she would absolutely never cheat on him because she possessed professional ethics. Julian glanced at her as if looking at a strange creature, asking her if she didn't feel a single bit of regret that he had such a defect. Elena blurted out, asking what there was to regret, before quickly correcting herself to say she didn't regret it at all and actually found it lucky. She explained that giving birth hurt like hell, not to mention the stretch marks and the toll it took on one's looks, so she had no desire for it. Upon returning home, just as she finished taking a fragrant shower, Julian was already tightly clutching a feather pillow, poking his face into her room. On guard, she shielded her chest and asked what he thought he was doing. Julian put on a docile, endearing face, claiming that the weather forecast predicted heavy rain and thunder tonight, so he was scared. Elena had no choice but to shift over and yield half of the bed to him, while casually checking her weather app to see where on earth it was storming. She wondered why this man had suddenly turned into such a clingy creature lately. He obediently snuggled into the blanket, as well-behaved as a Persian cat, murmuring that he was so sleepy. She thought to herself that if he was sleepy, he should just close his eyes, questioning why he had to report it to her and asking if he expected her to sing a lullaby. Telling him to keep dreaming, she threw her leg over his chest and wished him sweet dreams. It was only 10 in the evening, and no night owl would willingly sleep at this hour. She needed to grind TikTok to look at handsome guys first. Julian suddenly looked aggrieved, asking if those six-pack guys on Douyin were handsomer than him. Having been laughing out loud at a clip of personal trainers showing off their abs, Elena jumped in fright as if caught red-handed in an affair. Hurriedly hiding her phone behind her back, while stammering that it wasn't like that at all. Lying on his side with his hand propping up his chin, Julian leaned over and suggested she look at him instead. Her gaze involuntarily drifted down to his firm chest, peeking through his silk pajamas. Her face turned as red as a boiled shrimp, and feeling her decency slipping away, she hurriedly shut her eyes tight to drive him away, telling him to just go to sleep and do her a favor. Julian softly asked if he could hold her to sleep. Elena internally cried out for help, wondering what kind of love potion this prince had taken. Yet she had to admit that holding Julian while sleeping was incredibly comfortable. With the chilly autumn sleet outside, using a blanket alone felt stuffy, but not using one felt freezing, so having this human heater was truly not bad. Waking up the next morning, she saw Julian already seated at the desk, his 10 long, slender fingers clicking away on the keyboard. Noticing her squirming, he turned around and gave a gentle smile, wishing her a good morning. Her voice was as raspy as a drake's as she greeted him back. Goodness, it was early morning. She hadn't washed her face yet, her hair was a tangled mess, and there was probably sleep crust stuck to the corners of her eyes. Yet Julian could still maintain that gentle smile. Thanking him for his patience, Elena asked her husband what the madam would like to have for breakfast this morning. It was Sunday, which explained why he was so free. Rubbing her stomach, she replied that she was craving dim sum and abalone seafood porridge in Chinatown. Julian stepped closer, gently tousled her messy hair, and told her to go brush her teeth and wash her face so her husband could take her out to eat. She tumbled out of bed and stood brushing her teeth in front of the mirror right alongside him, feeling as though they were filming a romantic movie. From two people who had signed a marriage contract and lived together like college roommates, they now shared these mundane, heart-fluttering moments that were sweet enough to make her heart melt. They were playing the roles of husband and wife so realistically that she almost believed she was actually in love. After eating their fill, Julian held her hand as they strolled along the riverbank. Sensing a slight awkwardness in the air, Elena looked for a topic to break the ice, mentioning that this area was close to her old high school and asking if they should stop by to reminisce about the old days. Julian acted indifferent, so she resorted to her spoiled antics, swaying his arm and begging him to come along to look at her youth. Julian let out a soft laugh, revealing that her youth happened to be at his old school too. Stunned, she asked how that was possible, having no idea she shared an alma mater with her billionaire husband. He explained that he had only audited classes there for a single semester before being sent abroad to study, adding that she probably had no impression of him. It made sense. If someone with his flawless looks had been wandering around the school, her handsome guy radar would have scanned him a long time ago, unless he had vanished before she even had a chance to turn the radar on. She demanded proof, asking to see a picture. Julian scratched his head shyly, murmuring that it looked terrible and she shouldn't look. Despite saying that, his hand still unlocked his phone and pulled out a very old photograph. In the photo was a round, chubby boy with chubby cheeks, yet his facial features were still remarkably well defined, with thick eyebrows and bright eyes, a chubby kid with great potential. It was true what people said. Losing weight was the ultimate form of plastic surgery, and Julian was the living proof. Elena thought to herself that it wasn't ugly at all, but rather adorable enough to make her want to pinch his cheeks, concluding that only a fool would criticize the boss's looks. Straining her eyes to examine the background of the photograph, she was startled to spot a familiar side profile in the distance. Waiting a moment, she realized that the girl with the braided pigtails back there was none other than herself. Julian coughed broad and admitted sheepishly that he had noticed her for a very long time back then, but he had been scared to death and didn't dare ask for her Yahoo ID. So out of desperation, he had asked a friend to snap a candid shot, making it their very first photo together. Elena was completely shocked, her mouth hanging open wide enough to fit a chicken egg. She stammered, asking if he had a crush on her since way back then, noting that she had been both dark-skinned and snaggletooth back then, meaning his taste was incredibly heavy. Julian called her by her name, Elena, and reminded her of that day in the hallway when he was being mocked by a group of male students because of his oversized physique. He recalled that she was the one who had rushed out, scolded them furiously to bail him out, and loudly declared him to be her friend, telling him he wasn't fat, but just well-nourished and blessed. He added that at that exact moment, he thought she was incredibly cool because of those words, and he became determined to lose weight and transform himself to be worthy of her. Elena tried to rewind the film of her youth in her brain, and it seemed she really had done that heroic deed. She asked if that meant he had laid a trap for a very long time. Julian burst into a hearty laugh, a smirk as cunning as an old fox's, and replied that it wasn't entirely untrue. Her heart skipped a beat. Love was truly a twist of fate. From the moment she found out Julian had been infatuated with her for a decade, her narcissism and pride rose to a whole new level. Right in the middle of this romance, her stomach staged another loud protest, signaling that she was craving roasted chicken. She pulled out her phone to scroll through the app, but cursed her luck upon finding out that her favorite honey-roasted chicken shop was outside the delivery coverage zone. Winking, she sent a WeChat message to her husband, who was standing right next to her, calling out to the chairman and asking if he accepted a ride-hailing gig to go buy chicken for his wife. Julian replied almost instantly, stating that Chairman Vance wasn't free, but her husband was ready to serve. Those two words, your husband, made her face blush furiously. She wondered if she was really going to sell her soul just for a roasted chicken, before replying to her husband that his wife wanted to eat shredded roasted chicken. And just like that, in less than a heartbeat, he was ready to move. Julian had already taken the car to go hunt down the chicken for her. At the start of the work week, Mia held a stack of documents as she walked into Elena's executive office, letting out a long, heavy sigh. Mia whined to Elena, saying she was so scared of her stone-faced husband, Chairman Vance. Elena thought to herself, asking how a man who scampered off to stand in line just to buy her roasted chicken could be called stone-faced, and decided she would have to straighten out his attitude toward the staff when she got home tonight. Elena assured Mia to rest easy, promising that she would lecture him when she got home. Mia covered her mouth and giggled, remarking that only Elena could keep the big boss in check, before curiously asking how the two of them became a couple and begging to hear the story. When Elena replied that it was a blind date, Mia pouted, her expression clearly saying that Elena had to be joking. Elena insisted it was 100% true, telling Mia to go ask her chairman if she didn't believe it. Thinking back on this blind date, it really was quite surreal. This city was as small as a nostril. As it turned out, her original blind date partner was actually Julian's best friend. That guy knew his friend had been harbored a crush on Elena for so many years, so he urgently leaked the information. According to Julian's confession, he was away on business all the way in Seattle at the time, but the moment he heard the news, he dumped a multi-million-dollar contract, packed his suitcase, and dashed to the airport like a rocket, terrified that another guy would snatch her away. Elena thought to herself that she truly was blessed. 2 hours after their conversation, Julian walked into the company dangling 2 gigantic roasted chickens. The mouth-watering aroma was absolutely deafening as he announced that the chairman was treating the entire department to lunch, telling everyone to help themselves. Poking her head out of her office, Elena cheered for the chicken. Just as she was about to stick out her claws to grab a drumstick, Julian grabbed her by the scruff of her neck, dragged her into the executive office, and slammed the door shut, telling her that her portion was in here. Seeing the big boss walk in, Mia grew completely terrified and frantically clutched her documents. Julian raised an eyebrow and tilted his chin up, asking Mia if she wanted to stay and eat with them. Mia shook her head like a rattle, stammering that she wouldn't, and added that she would yield the space to the bosses. After speaking, she bolted outside like a flash, leaving Elena behind as she voraciously gnawed on a chicken leg. Elena glared at him, asking why he kept scaring the kids like that, noting that she felt sorry for them. Julian reasoned that if he didn't establish some authority, they might climb all over her head and sit on her in the future. The mindset of a big-time businessman was truly on another level. Once she finished devouring the meal, Elena let out a chain of yawns, rubbed her chubby stomach, and grumbled that she was too sleepy to function. Julian told her to go take a good nap in his private lounge. When she woke up in the afternoon, her spirit felt entirely refreshed. Mia tiptoed inside, teasingly noting that Elena's skin looked so rosy, meaning she must have slept exceptionally well. Elena replied that it was a guarantee, considering it was Julian's $2,000 latex mattress. She added that he had promised to toss that mattress over to her place for her to roll around on whenever he was free. Mia kept looking askance all around Elena's neck, searching for any traces of love bites. Elena flicked the girl's forehead, telling her that she was bound to be disappointed, and advising the young lady to have less drama in her brain. Mia clutched her forehead and snapped herself back into work mode, informing Elena that Richard from Vanthith had reported he would be coming over this afternoon to finalize the contract terms. Elena repeated the name Richard, realizing it was that fat, bald manager who had personally demoted himself. This man was notoriously lecherous in the industry, frequently using the excuse of discussing business to pull inappropriate stunts, and she found it utterly revolting to have to work with him. Mia noted that rumor had it his character was incredibly foul. Elena confirmed that it was foul beyond description, adding that former colleagues who had worked with Vanthith had texted her to warn her to stay on guard against this scumbag. She then asked what time he was arriving, and Mia replied that he was scheduled for 3 in the afternoon. Since Julian had just finished handling his work and had to catch a flight urgently to Seattle, Elena immediately pressed the buttons on her phone to call a professional bodyguard agency she knew. She requested to borrow 8 tall, heavily built men, noting that it would be even better if they knew some boxing skills, and ordered them to be present at the company by 2:30, promising to triple their pay. Mia broke out into a cold sweat, asking if Elena was staging a mock battle. Elena replied that prevention was better than cure. She strictly forbade Mia from reporting this to Chairman Vance, explaining that he was currently accelerating his pace to handle a project, so she didn't want to distract him. She added that the company was full of delicate, weak women, so if trouble actually arose, they would just be sitting ducks. Richard, carrying his beer belly, arrived just as the clock was about to strike working hours. He had scheduled for 3 o'clock, but didn't arrive until 4:30, truly showing no respect for anyone. He smiled sleazily and exclaimed that it was an honor to finally meet Sales Director Elena today, commenting that her beauty was breathtaking enough to ruin states and cities. Elena let out a cold sneer in her heart, labeling him an indecent old man. But on the outside, she maintained her professional demeanor. She replied that manager Richard flattered her too much, adding that since they were finalizing the contract terms today, he should present any opinions he had. Richard glanced at the 2 rows of burly, muscle-bound bodyguards standing like towering walls on both sides of her chair, and his face turned slightly pale. He asked if this lineup wasn't a bit too extravagant for Sales Director Elena. Elena assured him it was fine, stating that these men were just the company's security staff who were deaf and blind, so he should feel free to discuss business. Letting out a smirk, Richard asked if she didn't trust him, before slumping sleazily back into his chair. His tiny, shifty snake eyes swept up and down her body. Elena thought to herself that only a child would believe a guy wearing a bright gold chain as thick as a thumb was a decent person. Acting timid, she murmured that she was simply used to being faint-hearted, so she waved her hand and told the bodyguards to go stand outside the door for her. Even though she sent most of the bodyguards out into the hallway, the door remained wide open. No matter how bold he was, he wouldn't dream of touching a single strand of her hair. The negotiation dragged on for 2 suffocating hours, with Richard occasionally tossing out crude, flirtatious remarks and throwing she indecent, naked stares. Fortunately, Elena was wearing high-necked, fully buttoned dress pants and a suit jacket today. Suppressing her disgust, she finally finished wrapping up the contract, wishing manager Richard a safe trip out and noting that she wouldn't see him to the door. Just as she let out a sigh of relief and was about to gather her documents, Mia's piercing shriek echoed from the outer office. Elena rushed toward the door like a shot from a gun, and the sight before her eyes made hot blood rush straight to her brain. Richard was pinning Mia tightly against the sofa, aggressively ripping at the young girl's collar. Elena screamed at the bodyguards in the hallway, asking what they were doing, standing there frozen like statues, and ordering them to seize him for her. The bodyguards charged in like starving tigers, slamming Richard down onto the floor. Elena rushed over to wrap her arms tightly around Mia, quickly slipping off her own suit jacket to cover the girl. Mia trembled violently, sobbing convulsively in her arms. Even though he was pinned flat, Richard still shrieked aggressively, struggling wildly in an attempt to lunge forward and slap Elena. By this hour, everyone in the company had already clocked out and gone home, leaving her and Mia. Elena swung her hand and delivered a thunderous slap right across his face, making him see stars, while her other hand quickly pressed the buttons to call the police. She comforted Mia, telling her to be good, because her big sister was right here, and adding that the police would arrive momentarily. Suddenly, Richard went completely insane, letting out a roar like a wild beast. He kicked out to throw off 2 of the bodyguards and charged straight toward Elena. The distance was too close for her to dodge in time. He grabbed a fistful of her hair, yanked her backward, and slammed her head hard against the freezing ceramic tile floor. Her eyes went pitch black, and the air felt entirely sucked out of her lungs. Pinning her down, he glared and barked that he would handle her sooner or later. Elena bit her lip until it bled, choking back a wave of nausea. At the exact moment she thought she was about to suffocate, a freezing gust of wind swept past, and the weight on top of her vanished. In its place came a familiar scent of cedarwood. Julian. He was supposed to be on a flight to Seattle. She could only see Julian, his eyes bloodshot like a resurrected god of destruction. It took 4 or 5 bodyguards rushing in and ganging up together to finally drag Richard away from Julian's iron fists. Richard's face was beaten into an utterly pathetic, bruised mess. Julian scooped Elena into his arms, his hands trembling violently as he gripped her shoulders tight, soothing her by telling her not to be afraid because he was here now. Her tears raced each other, streaming down non-stop and soaking a patch of his shirt chest. His voice echoed as cold as if it were coming from the underworld, instructing her to take the other girl into the office and leave this chaotic mess for him to clean up. Richard was thrown straight into the precinct for intentional assault, coupled with a charge of attempted assault on an employee. Julian threw his money around to hire the most elite legal team in the country, vowing to kick him into prison to serve a proper punishment. Bookmark. Go back. Richard had been blinded by his own lust and acted far too flagrantly, and with the evidence right there on Mia's clothes, he was left with no way to deny his actions. As for Elena, the impact caused her a mild concussion, forcing her to be hospitalized for observation. When they returned home that night, Julian's face was as cold as 1,000-year-old ice, and he didn't even bother to open his mouth to utter a single word. Stealthily nudging his sleeve, Elena asked her husband what was wrong with him. Julian turned his face aside and let out a very loud, cold huff. Huffing, he told her he didn't even want to talk to her. Goodness, she wondered where the majestic, awe-inspiring chairman who had brutally beaten someone that afternoon had gone, now that he had suddenly turned into a sulking young maiden like this. She stammered that she had only hidden it because she saw how busy he was with his business trip, adding that she had even hired 8 heavily built bodyguards, so who could have known that scumbag would play dirty and bite her from behind? Julian continued to huff, telling her she didn't respect him at all and didn't even bother to love him anymore. Oh, goodness. Looking at this prince, Elena wrapped her arms tightly around his neck and rubbed her cheek against his, promising she had learned her lesson and vowing to report to him from now on, even when she just went to the restroom, begging him not to be angry with her anymore. Julian wrapped his arms right back around her, squeezing so tightly she could barely breathe, his voice turning raspy and filled with absolute sincerity as he told her that if anything happened to her, he wouldn't be able to go on living. Calling her by her name, Elena, he begged her never to put herself in danger again because he was terrified. Her heart turned as soft as jelly, and she nodded her head rapidly. Agreeing, she swore that since Richard was that despicable, she would rather rip up the Vanthith project than bother doing it, and promised to go meet the owner of Vanthith in person tomorrow to compensate for the contract. Julian leaned down to kiss her forehead, casually dropping a bombshell by telling her there was no need for compensation, because he had just conveniently thrown his money around to buy out that entire Vanthith corporation. Elena's eyes rolled back completely white, and she shrieked, asking Julian if he was crazy, wondering what on earth he bought Vanthith for when it was as massive as a mountain. Julian stated that tomorrow he would force the highest-ranking executive of Vanthith to drag his body over, bow his head, and apologize to her and that young female employee. Elena panicked, wondering if this was the elite's way of using money to crush people to death, and frantically told him to drop it, reasoning that the man was a big boss and the fault lay with the single bad apple spoiling the barrel. So pushing people too far wasn't a good idea either. Julian proudly lifted her chin, declaring that being able to apologize to Julian Vance's wife was a blessing for 3 generations of that man's family. A few weeks later, due to the aftershocks of the impact, she had to return to the hospital for a checkup. Lately, she had been frequently dizzy, nauseous, and felt sick to her stomach whenever she smelled food. The male doctor examining her looked quite handsome and prescribed a series of tests for her, including an HCG test and an abdominal ultrasound. Holding the slips and about to go pay the fees, she suddenly froze, spun right back into the room, and asked the handsome doctor why she was examining her head but being forced to get a stomach ultrasound and an HCG blood test. The doctor gave a gentle smile, explaining that based on her symptoms, he suspected she was pregnant, noting that the HCG test was for an accurate diagnosis, while the ultrasound was to rule out an ectopic pregnancy just to be safe. Pregnant? Elena panicked, wondering if they had really hit the jackpot after just that one accidental mishap the previous month, asking herself if it was truly a 100% success rate. Her mind spun like a whistle. Thinking back, she had been as sleepy as a pig lately, and her period hadn't bothered to visit for 2 weeks now. She had simply assumed it was an irregularity caused by chasing deadlines and stress, never imagining she had actually won the grand lottery. Dragging her dazed figure out to the waiting lobby, Julian saw how pale her face was and frantically rushed over. He asked what was wrong, calling her Elena, and wanted to know what the doctor had said. She pouted with tears rimming her eyes, her limbs turning completely weak as she clutched his arm tightly. She wailed to Julian that she was holding him responsible because she was pregnant. Elena thought to herself that her mother-in-law's infertility script was truly the scam of the century. In stark contrast to her panic, Julian's face lit up as if he had struck pure gold. He reached out to lift her completely off her feet, laughing as radiantly as a child who had been given candy, telling his silly girl that having a baby was a joyful matter, so he wondered why she was crying until her face was a mess. Elena wailed and threw a tantrum, crying that she would blow up fat, get acne, and ruin her skin, and he would get bored of her, dislike her for being ugly, and go look for other long-legged girls. Julian pressed his forehead against hers, his gaze as deeply affectionate as autumn water. He told his foolish girl that in this life and this lifetime, Julian Vance was only infatuated with Elena alone. He urged her to just peacefully give birth to their precious baby and leave this world for him to handle, promising to raise both mother and child into the happiest little princesses. Elena sniffled, making him promise, and threatened that if he dared to break his word, she wouldn't let him off. And indeed, after their little bundle of joy came into the world, Julian kept his oath perfectly. From a domineering CEO whom 10,000 people feared, he transformed into a genuine nursing father who loved his wife and doted on his child. Julian leaned down to give her a deep kiss, murmuring her name, Elena, and thanking her for coming into his life. Looking deep into his gentle eyes, which held an entire sky full of stars, she didn't even know at what point she had completely drowned in this relationship. Step by step, he had broken through her resilient shell, using his gentleness and power to shelter her from every storm. As for her, from this day forward, she was willing to hold his hand tightly, joining him in writing the rest of the humorous yet sugary romance movie of their lives. The end.
Elena shows us that when we dare to stand up for ourselves, life rewards us in beautiful ways, and real love becomes the strongest support we can have. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe. See you in the next video.